Thank you for coming and joining me today, Indu. Welcome to the All Nets Taken podcast. So we're going to dive in today to start talking about the glamorization of asanas. And I think we're all very familiar with the idea of that bikini-clad model on the beach with some sort of, for lack of a better word, advanced, or I suppose excessively flexible and often on exotic sunset. And I think a lot of this comes from the sort of idea of sex sells idea within algorithms and advertising that we have seen for a very long time within particularly American culture, but I think westernized culture and across the globe. Are there any potential subtler ways that you see people maybe inadvertently contributing and reinforcing this glamorization of asanas without maybe intentionally doing it or just not thinking about that that's what they're doing?
I think that's a great question to just to start our conversation with, Adrian. First of all, I would say that it really doesn't matter. What you're wearing has almost nothing to do with what you're practicing. It doesn't matter what you're wearing or what's your personal practice looks like. I think glamorization of asana happens when we think of yoga is equal to asana. And that is something that happens, that a part of it is played by communication. So many of the classes, yoga instruction classes, in which primarily asanas are taught and demonstrated or instructed into, are called yoga classes. So anyone who is practicing then goes out with this feeling, with this idea, with this experience that I practice yoga. Now, most of those who have studied yoga either by themselves through a book, through a teacher, or in a teacher training program, they know that yoga has 8 limbs. At least hatha yoga that we practice, it has 8 limbs, where asana is just one of those. But because of the over focus on asanas, it has also led to not just the misunderstanding that yoga is equal to asana, but then also the fixation that I need to look exactly like how the instructor is demonstrating or how I have seen the photographs in a book or in a digital media, in any format, because then the student, the practitioner, is now trying to absolutely mimic that. Now, in pursuing that, A, they may harm themselves. B, because they think that only by looking like that am I really doing yoga. And then comes that because I want to look like that, A, I'm going to either force my body, or B, I'm going to start comparing and feeling bad about myself that I don't look like that. And C, then I start feeling bad that because my body does not look like that, there's something wrong with my body. And D, then sometimes we start overusing props because we think the props can help us get into that position. That the props can help me explore my body, which is absolutely okay and valid and safe and accessible way to do it, but not because of the fixation that yoga should look a particular way. There is this overemphasis which is then creates this snowball effect of so many things: misunderstanding, misinterpretation, cultural appropriation, harming, physical harm, when we are really folding, molding, and holding our body in a certain position. So I would say, Adrian, it's not so subtle. Right from the get-go of naming a class, which is 90% asana, into a yoga class, into beginner, intermediate, or advanced, then we are actually pointing towards asana. Why not name it yoga asana or yoga pranayama or yoga meditation? Because there are so many different kinds of meditation, that it's breathing practices that are inspired from so many different cultures. So I think communication matters, whether it is written, whether it is verbal, whether it is in any format, audio, video, whatever channel or medium you're choosing. It's so important to be clear. What is it that you really want to say? And always be mindful that whatever has been your experience, it is limited B, that there is a bigger picture of you. And only when we are ready, we can explore that. And C, you can do yoga without doing any asana. There is that possibility of bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, karma yoga, laya yoga, mantra yoga. I can keep going on. There are so many types of yoga, not as in types, but more like paths, pathways to enter into the state of yoga where you do not need any asana. So there is fixation, there is glamorization, there is over demonstration, there is over propping, there is so much of it, and so many people can feel closer to yoga if we pull back from asana.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot, that last part at the moment, because I physically can't do any asana at the moment in my postpartum state. So my yoga practice is pretty much 5% maybe asana and leaning into all of those other areas. So I see a lot of teachers, particularly on Instagram, and they're talking to other teachers and they're talking about asana, but they just use the term yoga. And then when someone says, you're talking about asana, not yoga, they go, oh, but we all know that what I'm talking about. And it's just tweaking that little bit of, like you said, your communication. And I don't see why we wouldn't, because as you said, if you've studied yoga, then you know that there are other terms for these, and you know that that is not the critical part.
See, that's what I think. It's important to not assume that everyone knows, because what everyone knows, they may have an idea of certain content in a certain context, but we don't know everyone's context. We don't know what is their background. We don't know how many years of studies they have done, and in those many years, how many years were dedicated years. So there is so much to be understood here, that by tweaking or by adding, we are doing a disservice to ourselves, to the practitioners, to the participants, and to the future of yoga. That when we simply start saying, tweaking at inappropriate places, calling yoga nidra as nidra, I'm doing a nidra class. Well, nidra simply means sleep. Are we really doing a sleep class? Because yoga nidra is the process of awakening. So it's just when you tweak at inappropriate places, you are taking away the meaning. And where it needs to be added, it should be added. And sometimes we simply add an English translation next to a Sanskrit word, thinking that, well, I'm keeping the tradition, but I'm also translating it so that it becomes accessible. But that also leads to dilution. It's important to understand the subject in its context. And that may take time. What is this rush that we want to sell yoga to everybody? Yes, yoga is for everybody, but is it really for everybody? Because it's a journey of courage, it's a journey of readiness, it's a journey of discernment, and not everyone is ready for that, and that's okay. But by pressurizing and forcing ourselves to believe that yoga really is for everybody, we are then diluting it in ways in which it should not be diluted. We should not necessarily make a simple thing complex and a complex thing simple. It takes time to understand some things, and we must honor that.
Yeah, and then I guess from that as well, if you're diluting things and not alluding even that there is more to this concept, people might just take it as that is what it is, and then not feel the need to explore it more, because they're like, oh, I understand it, without actually getting time to sort of embody it and process it and learn what the grander, deeper meaning behind whatever the topic is that you're covering. I wanted to jump on because you mentioned before about injury, and I have definitely talked to quite a few people and myself with a couple of things where you have injured yourself by trying to get into certain postures and things earlier in practice. There is a big movement as well. I see sort of two sides. There's about cueing when you are working with asana. Some camps are like it has to be very sort of specific, and then others are like just do what your body feels in the moment. Is there a better way in terms of actually getting into the asanas? Because there is certain positions that probably protect parts of your body as well if you're practicing them certain ways versus just going with the flow. You might be causing yourself injury. How does teachers navigate that kind of space?
I think as instructor, teacher, practitioner, you should humbly accept, acknowledge, and know that there is always a space to unlearn and learn. There is no harm in reflecting upon the idea, how are my cues? I've personally done that so many times where I record myself, listen to myself, pay attention to the pauses, pay attention to repetitive words, pay attention to the tone. Is it suggestive? Is it instructive? Does it allow space for the practitioners to listen, digest, practice, and reflect? Or is it fast? I think there is a value in paying attention to cueing because that is your audible demo. And sometimes, so many teachers that I have personally studied with, Adrian, and these are all traditional teachers from India, they rarely get up to demonstrate or to adjust. Most of their adjustment is by observing and then changing the cues or allowing time for the person to imagine. We have taken away imagination. Many of the traditional yogic texts, whether we talk about Bhagavad Gita or Yoga Sutras or Yoga Ratnavali, Yoga Deepika, none of them have images. Do we really think that people at that time did not know how to draw images? There is a reason there has to be space for imagination. There has to be space for the respect for how does this sutra sits with me in my life at this stage versus when I will read it 10 years later. This fixation with asana has led to even the most common text talked about, heard about in yoga community all over the world is Yoga Sutras. In Yoga Sutras, there is no asana that is talked about, except for a state of asana, which is Sukha Asana. Just an experience that when you put your body, irrespective of the position that you are in, there should be that experience. When there is that experience of effortlessness, pleasantness, and ease of mind, that is when it is an asana. Where is the fold, mold, and hold here? Where is the fixation of any position here? So I just think that it is so important to learn that A, what kind of yoga I wish to share, and B, there is always a scope to refine my cues based on my understanding, my cues based on how the practitioners are practicing. And it is not that there is over cueing or there is under cueing, and then I compare, then I feel bad, and then I feel that, oh, because of this fear or because of this fear of missing out, now I have to learn. Again, there is no space for self reflection and realization. We are doing everything out of pressure. And whenever we do something out of fear, out of pressure, out of insecurity, it is going to fire back in some ways or the other. But when you sit with yourself and you come to this understanding, or when you're working with a mentor, a teacher whom you can have a guidance from, that person can allow some cue for reflection. But because we are picking up this cue, as you mentioned, from a lot of social media, the cue is not coming from within. That urge to improve or to reflect or to work upon, what do I really want to study? We're not sitting with ourselves. We're just blindly following. And my teacher used to say that just some time back, I was speaking to her, and randomly she shared some things with me. And I just listen and make notes and chew upon it. She was sharing, Indu, your name is Indu. If you have to teach someone how to write Indu, they have to learn letter by letter. And by the end, the result will be Indu. In the same way, when we practice asana, there is a steps. There is a steps to go through. It's not the final position. It is the process that you are going through, which is the process of unveiling, the process of therapeutic balance, the process of realization, the process of peeling of the layers. But so many times, Adrienne, because of our understanding of the body, it's just physical body. So therefore comes the fixation. This muscle has to be like this joint has to be over like this. So the fixation with a certain image that you were talking about, should we allow space? Should we follow the exact cueing related to going into an asana? I would say the context matter. This approach of either or is not going to work. The context in every situation is important. And two, sooner or later, yoga practitioners, students, teachers, therapists have to realize that when we talk about yoga, we are primarily talking about subtle. The practice is done through the subtle body. It is not called Shvasayama, it is called Pranayama. It's not just a breathing exercise. The definition of asana is not related to the physical body. That sukha is a state of mind. Mental pleasantness is being talked about. And yes, when we add that lens of Ayurveda, and through Ayurveda comes the understanding of doshas, agni, tissues, dhatus, and marmas, which are really important vital energy points spread all over the body, the bridge points between the subtle and the physical body. Sometimes in some asanas, pranayamas, even in shavasana, attention to certain points or regions are important because they help you connect to the subtle body. So the true practice of asana is when the focus is on the subtle and the physical body, movement of the physical body is just a consequence. But my gaze, my awareness is on the subtle body. There will be minimal harm. It will be true to what is yoga. With that idea, you will always have philosophy as the foundation, ahimsa, non-harm, satya, truthfulness, to the philosophy of yoga, to your capacity, and also to the fact that all the images that we have come up with in the books are our imagination. The texts are not saying this is exactly how it should look. It is our limited ego and imagination which has created those images. If we really want to learn yoga in context with the texts, we have to keep in mind there is freedom there. One can visualize the pose and can still be practicing asana. One can do the same asana seated, instead of seated, lying down, and still be in that asana. It is a state of mind. Let us not forget that.
And then I guess when we take away all of that subtle part, that's where the glamorization of these asanas kind of seeps in as well, because we're taking that imagination and that context and everything else about what it is and reflection time from the asana itself, turning it into just a posture rather than a practice, I suppose.
Not even a posture, a pose. Not even a posture, a pose in which you are posing. Now, when we are taking a selfie, we want to have the best angle, right? Most of the people know, oh, this is my better side, this is my better angle. That's what we are doing with asanas. We think it's a pose and we are posing. But the biggest disservice is not to the yoga, it's to our own path. We are fooling no one else by clicking that picture perfect asana photo. We are fooling ourselves. What did you realize? What did you realize in that asana? Not what you look like. What does it feel like? What did you learn and what did you unlearn?
Yeah, you've taken that whole part out of the entire thing. You've just focused on getting the shot, I suppose, and potentially working up to that position. What was your motivation? Was your motivation so you could take that photo and get into that pose? Then you've removed the entire journey for yourself with that particular asana. I wanted to dive a little bit more into the real meaning of yoga, sort of talked about it a bit. But there is, as you mentioned earlier, we don't want to assume there are so many different ways to study yoga, and then a lot of the modern teacher trainings as well kind of remove a lot of that. The focus is on asana, which probably is what is also contributing to this glamorization of it. So what misconceptions do you commonly see about what yoga really is and what it really means within this yoga community?
Question, Adrian. Exploring what is yoga. Share some of the definitions I have read in texts. Also share some things that I have intellectually got out of it. Tiny bit of it that has stayed with me as an experience. Really what yoga is that eventual state of realization where there is nothing to realize. As long as we are realizing something, it is just something. What Patanjali talks about in Yoga Sutra, Tadadrishta Swarupe Avasthanam, that the seer then sits in their own true nature. That is the true definition of yoga. There is nothing to experience. There is no object. There are no experiences. So what we can derive from it is that yoga is a state. And as we approach that state, along the path, there will be certain realizations of what is temporary, what is mutable, what is transient, what is eternal, what is the truth. These are some of the realizations that start sticking to us. And then we start understanding that the fixation that I have with my body is temporary. Then we start fixating ourselves to everything is breath, everything is prana, everything is all about energy levels. Then we realize that also changes. Our mind also changes. We slowly start realizing even the difference between manas, the sensory mind, and the buddhi, the discerning mind. We start understanding the difference between the discerning mind, that even the discerning mind is not the state of samadhi, that the discerning mind is also once in a while in that state of clarity because of the state of mind that is sattva guna, which shines once in a while. That even that is not the eventual state that Yoga Sutras talk about as Kaivalya. We have to keep moving. We have to keep peeling layers. And it will require sincerity and dedication. I do not know if any teacher training program at Trian can do justice. I don't know if it's really the fault of teacher training programs. We have made yoga studies into 200 hour, calling it teacher training. I think that step itself is causing a lot of harm. Because there is that pressure, first of all, on the instructor that I have to teach the entire body of yoga in this 200 hours. In these 200 hours, then I have to also pick things which sell, because I am now selling it as a profession. So I cannot just spend 180 hours on philosophy and meditation and reflection, and um, really encouraging the importance of that. I have to also teach something that sells these people who are paying me this much, and then they are graduate of this um, institute or studio or program. How do people keep coming back? I need to teach something so that these teachers can become successful. So it's kind of a vicious circle, and it's impossible to create a solid foundation of a good teacher and a good instructor with all ethics, with business knowledge, with solid knowledge of the philosophy and everything in 200 hours. I think it would be hopeful, it would be beneficial if the foundational trainings of 200 hours are called student programs instead of teacher training program. See, the pressure also comes on the participants. Maybe someone was just drawn towards yoga because they felt, oh, I really want to explore my own mind, or this sounds like a wonderful philosophy, I want to explore that, or this benefited me, so I want to learn more. So maybe they really arrived to yoga from a good place, but we have turned them into an asana machine.
Yeah.
So, and then they operate out of fear that I hope I'm not appropriating. Am I leading this correctly? Then there are so many ways to go into the same asana. They soon realize that yoga that I learned about as a philosophy, as paths, they are actually styles. Now, should I practice it this style or that style? Then the dvandva, the conflict starts. Is this a style correct or that style correct? So there is, I think, that the pressure, I'm saying that the pressure also comes on the student, that they have to be successful, they have to do justice, and then they have to do it right by the philosophy, by the culture, by the tradition. It's a lot to take. When I studied from my teacher, I know it's not possible for everybody, but I can only share from my journey. When I studied from my teacher, I went and lived with my teacher, lived with her. And it was not hour study, it was not counted by hours. I stayed until the time my teacher said, now you go and share. And there was no examination where I was passed or failed. My only passing grace was my teacher said, go and share. I can make whatever I can make out of it. But I know in that moment, I thought, this is wrong. I cannot teach. I don't know anything. But merely this trust between the student and teacher, and knowing that I must continue. Even if I don't trust myself, I must continue, because now I have this debt of wisdom. This teacher has spent this time with me, trusting that I'm going to keep sharing. I think that's a different state of mind with which you are inspired to share versus forced to share, or forced to think from the perspective that yoga is a profession, and then how do I make money? How do I justify that it is a profession? I think the parameters have changed. I may not know all the answers. In fact, I don't know all the answers. I just think that each one of us has to reflect, what are we doing, and be truthful to it. Just be truthful to it. Be truthful to your conscience. Make it easy upon yourself to look into your own eyes in the mirror.
Yeah, I like to think of, for me anyway, the teacher trainings, it's just a beginning taster, effectively. Like, you've been a student going to classes and you want to learn more, and it's just a place to structurally kind of learn a bit more in a formalized setting, but it definitely doesn't qualify you even necessarily to become like the teacher, as you say. It's more puts you on the path of being a more in-depth student, I suppose. Is there, have you got any ideas of how, because it sounds like this is probably just more of a grand community kind of issue, because also, as you mentioned, from the students' pressure, like you want to go and learn all these things, but it's probably you just don't understand what it all is yet, and you don't understand that 200 hours is not going to really teach you all of that, is there a way, as anyone with students, able to sort of transform that so people can have a better expectation of their yoga practice, I suppose, and what teacher trainings may provide for them?
Yeah, that's a big question too. And I think it can be considered something that's an evolving conversation, not something that, at least from my limited mind, I say something and thinking that that would be the answer. That would be an illusion for me to think that and to pass on that. Uh, I just think that even if it is a 200-hour program, it's some sort of a way to gauge the intention of the participant. Are they here for the title? Are they here for the certificate? Are they here with a friend? Are they here because it is trending? Just even if you're not judging it, just instigate that thought process in the participant. Why are you here? I think that instigation, that cueing is really important. And also throughout this process, continuously reinforcing what you just mentioned, Adrienne, that there is just no way 200 hours the beginning. That reinforcing the value of continued studies. Again, not just for getting your CEUs, really understanding the value of continued studies. That only then you can, in any authenticity, understand what is yoga or come closer to the idea of yoga. So I would emphasize instilling that idea of why am I here? And instilling that idea of continued education, be it working one-to-one in a mentoring situation, be it by reading books, be it by doing some programs, studying some specific subjects that draw you, that you're ready for, to constantly search, what am I inspired by? And not just follow trends, not just follow the societal pressure or the digital social media pressure. The value of sitting with yourself is, I think, very important. But at the same time, I also feel, Adrienne, that everything is cyclic. It's almost as if the nature of true knowledge itself is elusive. It likes to run in roundabouts, and it likes to play hide and seek with the seeker. And it likes to wait and see, did you find me? And now I'm hiding here. That the nature of the true knowledge is elusive. And once we learn that, we also become hopeful that nothing will happen to yoga, even if the larger grand community of yoga is to some extent misunderstanding it. We can also put that in a scheme of things that this is Maya, this is illusionary, this is just the way the knowledge tests us. And the knowledge will always be there. Whenever now, in this very moment, or 5 months later, or 5 years later, or 5 decades later, or if we believe in the karmic cycle, 5 births later, whenever we are ready, this knowledge is called eternal, immutable. It will always be there. Whenever we are ready, it will be there to grant us that insight, that realization. So we have to also observe it from this play, from this viewpoint of that it's just a play of knowledge, that things are happening, and do our bit in sharing whatever little we have realized, but not sharing it from a sense of imposition or policing, but sharing from a place of humbleness and knowing that even if in this lifetime you have seen 5 years of this other person's life, you have not seen their entire life. You don't know the same person who may be appropriating right now, what happens to them 5 months later, 5 years later. So you have to allow that space of growth to a person. And who are we to say this is right, this is wrong? We can only share our experiences and utilize some sources, some valid sources to say that this is why I am saying this. But a human lifespan and span of realization is very long. Give the other person grace and take grace yourself also. And trust that we will all come to that same point of realization sooner or later. If we are postponing it, it is our.
I like that you said that, because I feel there is a lot of pressure sometimes to, especially like be your best self kind of movements and things, to get all the information in 5 months time I'll be living my best life, and then that's it, I've achieved it. And it's not, you need time, and you can learn things as you go. You can't shove everything in your brain at one moment.
It is, you see, this I don't know, this short of motivation, that's not how it works. The word that is used in traditional texts is shane kshane, one step at a time, one moment at a time. And the second philosophical anchor point that is given to a student is yatha shakti, based on your capacity. Not just physical capacity, mental capacity, karmic capacity, pranic capacity. We have different capacities and they have to be respected, not compared, not feel pride that, oh, I can fold or I can hold or I can twist. So what? So what? That's not the goal of yoga, to be able to fold, mold, and hold the body, or to be able to hold the breath for a certain duration of time. So what if we can mimic or regurgitate all the sutras? That's not the goal of yoga either. So what if I have done some kind of mastery in Sanskrit? So what? None of that is the goal of. None of that is. Keep yourself humble. Keep doing the best you can. There is this idea of give it more than your 100% is an oxymoron. Don't run after this idea of this short momentum and a burst of motivation. One step at a time and true to your capacity. Not compare yourself with anyone else or anything else. Yoga is rooted in ahimsa, not comparison. Not feeling guilty or embarrassed. There is always a space to grow in yoga. And may that realization come from within or inspired from outside, not imposed.
My baby has been teaching me a lot at the time, because I think we often rush these things as well, and then you realize you rushed it and you weren't in the moment and you missed all that time. So you really have to savor each moment, because it's there and you're not getting that back again. I think that gets the bottom sometimes. Speaking of good resources and reliable resources, you have 3 books available. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about those?
Just for a second, I want to go back to your closing statement when you're talking about no rush or fear of the moment or this is the moment to enjoy. I want to bring the attention of the fellow students, fellow seekers, listeners, viewers, that in yogic texts and traditional texts, they begin with this word atha. And atha means eternal present. There is no fear of missing. You're not missing anything. Of course, whatever is your capacity, yatha shakti, be present. But not with this fear that this moment won't come back. This moment of realization is an eternal moment. indestructible moment. That is why the texts don't begin with, on this date, let's begin yoga. It starts with atha. Now, let's begin yoga. So I hope that we as participants, as students, as teachers, whatever we consider we are, whatever title we want to give to ourselves, I choose the title student. So I'm going to say for myself, as a student, know that atha is the moment you are ready. Because this knowledge is indestructible. It will always be there. Teachers will always be there. Sources will always be there. From time to time, the kind of sources will change. Now there is video sources, audio sources, podcasts, written sources, all kind of sources. It will change with time. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, maybe it will be different kind of sources. So these 3 books that I wrote are really inspiration from the participants who have come to different classes. They have nudged me to share in a written format. So the first book that I wrote was in 2005, Yoga, Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision. And this work has been republished in 2019, almost like 80% new work. And this book is in my effort to share yoga in a way that is non-harming, that incorporates Ayurveda and Tantra and Upanishads, sharing it in a way which is consolidated and cohesive, how I have learned from my teachers. So it has chapters on yama, niyama, on shat kriyas, on asana, pranayama, meditation, all these different things, and going in detail about the practices through the lens of Ayurveda and Tantra. So if someone is interested in that, I would not say that go in this order. I would say again, Yatha Shakti, wherever your inspiration is. The second book is Mudra, the Sacred Secret. My journey of yoga began in about 1998. At that time, my first subject that I studied was mudras. And the teacher that I met at the age of 16 initiated me in the practice of mudra. So this book is an homage to that teacher, and it is all about hand mudras. This is an accessible way to practice, something to incorporate during meditation, during mantras, when you're going for a walk, when you're reading a book. Way to also understand that subtle is almost everything in yoga. And then a more very practical everyday book called SOMA 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care. And these recipes are not what you go in the kitchen, cook and make. These are recipes of asanas, pranayama, mantra, mudra, and kitchen remedies, and how to make authentic chai. It's all kinds of things. What do you do when you have a headache, or when you have a rash, or when you have dryness on the skin, or if you want to prepare a hair mask for your hairs, or you want to prepare a Ayurvedic hair oil. So this is a bunch of recipes that I've learned living in a joint family in India. All the teachers that I have met that I can remember from the age 5 onwards, what that I've learned from oral tradition. And this book is also available as an ebook. So those listeners or viewers who are not from United States, you can get it from anywhere you get ebooks. But these books are also available through my website, through Amazon, or reach out through the website, and it can be shipped anywhere in the world.
I have SOMA 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care, and it is a wonderful collection of all kinds of things. So I highly recommend that. I'll have links for all of these as well in the show notes, wherever you are listening or watching this, and also links to your website and everything. I like to finish with this last sort of rapid fire question. If you could turn to yourself when you first began to formally study yoga, what advice would you?
I don't know if there is an advice. I would just be, I think I'm kind of content. I'm content with the mistakes I made. And I'm content with my ability to pay attention when I was nudged. So I would just give a smile with contentment. There's no advice. Let life unfold at its own pace.
Beautiful. That's the perfect sort of tie, I think, for this conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is always such a pleasure to get to talk to you.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.